We're going to go ahead and call the meeting to order at 3:03. And first order of business that we're looking for amending the agenda. We need to remove item 2023-36 from consent to non-consent, and we would just basically shift it on your agenda. We just shift it down, so that then would become the first item we're going to have discussion on. So I would look for a motion.
So moved with the amended.
Second.
You say who, right? Okay. So we have a motion and a second on the floor. Discussion. Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. All right, we move to right away to, first off, I'm sorry. We have a public, under public invitation, we have a Jeni here today to see us. Is Jeni here? Jeni? They wouldn't be online, right? We don't do that? Okay. Okay, anyways, we got an email that they were gonna be here, so if, I'm not sure if it's a he or she, if they would show up later, we'll see if we can slide them in somewhere, so. All right, we'll move on then. First off, we're gonna start with the chair's report. And I'm gonna keep this rather brief, because I think we're gonna have a lot of discussion the same way we did on, in our exec board, on a couple of the items. Obviously, we have some big items on the agenda, and we had a very robust discussion, and actually, we had to kind of stop it short to get through all of our agenda items, but like I said, just looking at the projects and the requests to see if we're doing the right thing. One thing that we certainly came out of that is that we need to look at our policies about extensions and things like that as we move into the future. And again, you'll hear that conversation as we move into that. And there's one other item that I do want to hit on that we talked about. It's a new funding source that we're going to be getting, and we're going to see more conversation on it in July. It might come up in our legislative reports here as well, is a sales tax that we're going to be getting now that might get us up to like 24 million a year. So it's a great new funding source. And we'll be talking about that at length in future meetings. It is going to cause possibly a delay in solicitations as we move that money, try to get that money in this year's solicitations, or next year's solicitations, so that we, so it doesn't sit there and wait till the next solicitation. There's a ton of money in there, and then they look at that and say, we're not utilizing it. So look for that in the July meeting, and you might hear some more about it in the legislature. Anything else? That's pretty much. All right, I'm going to cut it at that, and we'll leave it there. So I'm going to move on to agency reports. So we'll start with the legislative update from Judd.
Well, great. Nice to see everybody. I'm Judd Schetnan. I'm the Government Affairs Director for the Met Council. So it's nice to see everybody. I've got my counterpart at MnDOT, Erik Rudeen, here as well. And so we're going to give you a overview of the legislative session as it relates to transportation and the Met Council and transit in particular. So I will say that I'm trying really hard. I mentioned earlier to not wear a suit this summer after having to get through the session. So trying to go a little casual here in the summer. So hopefully that's okay with everybody. And on top of that, I took my wife's car to work today and left my glass in the car, so I have a borrowed pair of cheaters here. So, and they're the wrong strength. So we'll try to get through.
Other than that, it's a great day, right?
Other than that, I got to get through this, and then the day will improve. So,
what time's your tea time?
Oh yeah, you could read it to me. That would be.
What
great.
time's your tea time?
No, I wish I had a tea time. I don't. I'm playing pickleball tonight. But other than that, no, things are good. So thanks again for having me here. I come about once every year after session just to fill everybody in and take any questions on what happened with the legislature here. So here's the button. So there was one major budget bill, House File 2887, that passed this year. That has to pass. It is the is the transportation funding bill. And as folks can see, Metro Mobility received roughly $56 million for the next 2 years. That is base funding for the Metro Mobility service. That's our paratransit service that I'm sure folks are aware of. One thing I'd like to note is Metro Mobility, after this budget cycle, becomes a forecasted program of the state. So rather than the funding being run through Metropolitan Council, that will change to the state managing the funding for Metro Mobility moving forward. It won't change who operates it, but it does. It is important to us because the cost of this service is incredibly high. In the past, we would always be back asking for the legislature to fund it. Similar to other social services types, service in the Department of Human Services, this is now being treated similarly in that fashion, so it'll just be funded as part of the state's forecasting. So that is very, very helpful. For transit systems operations, there was about $85.5 million that were provided. $50 million was provided to the Blue Line extension for that project for capital. There was some additional detail there that says only $40 million of it can be used after a full funding grant agreement is signed, and that has to be done before June 30th. So that basically means that there is $10 million available for that project right out of the chute. Representative Tabke worked very hard to get $3 million for highway BRT development in the Highway 169 and Highway 55 corridors. And then for transit service or systems operations, that $32 million that you see there is the base general fund that we receive for our rail. So our base funding was held intact. On top of that, there were $2 million for transit service intervention grants, and that was basically funding that's made available for us to work with nonprofits and contractors in order to add enhanced transit safety, to be able to make sure people have access to enhanced social services. So we are working on that. We actually have an RFP out for that right now and hope to be able to distribute some of those grants here very soon in the next month or so. Another item that occurred as part of the funding is that the motor vehicle sales tax rate was changed. Previously it was 6.5%, while most of the sales tax rate across the state is 6.875. There was an adjustment made to add that 0.375, and as part of that, they reduced the overall share where Metro Area Transit previously received 36%. They dropped that to 34.3%. It's basically a push. We get about additional $1 million from that, but that was a way to make sure that evened out. And then on top of that, our regional transit capital bonds were included in the transportation bill as well. Those are bonds that the council issues. We use it basically to replace our transportation transit fleet. And so it's the 20% match for the 80% federal funds that go to fund Metro Transit buses, Metro Mobility, the suburban transit provider fleet as well. So it is a regional pot of dollars that then the council levies a property tax to be able to finance those bonds. The big deal that happened this last session is that there was a 3/4 cent sales tax that was adopted by the legislature that goes into effect on October 1st, 2023. That 17% of those funds of the new sales tax will be provided to the counties, where 83% of that comes to the council, to the Metropolitan Council. 5% of that is for active transportation, and that is what the chair mentioned before. There are new funds that are going to come to TAB that is going to be your responsibility to distribute those. And over the course of 10 years, it's about $240 million, and so about $24 million a year. 95% of those funds come to Metro Area Transit for operations, maintenance, and capital projects. And so there is a whole list of additional sales tax uses. There's basically 13 of them that the legislature outlines for us to spend that money on. But the biggest one is changing how the council works with the counties basically on the delivery of transitway operations and capital maintenance into the future, where previously we had agreements with the counties in order to fund those operations, like 50% of the blue line, 50% of the green line was being funded through Hennepin and Ramsey County, or we had North Star, or even the Orange Line. All of that changes now on October 1st. That responsibility becomes the responsibility of the Met Council. And so we will use the sales tax in order to do that. So there is obviously relief for the counties in that area, but we are also taking over the capital maintenance of these projects, and so of current projects and future projects, I should add. And so that is a major dynamic shift that has changed. This goes all the way back to 2004 when we were working out the agreement on how the blue line was going to be operated. There was always a question about capital maintenance that was never quite ironed out. Then we got to 2008 with the emergence of CTIB, and then 2017 when CTIB went away. We still didn't have a lot of clarity related to capital maintenance other than for Hennepin County related to the operations of the Southwest Line and responsibility for the capital maintenance of the Southwest Line as well. All of that changed. So now the council is taking over 100% of both the operations and the capital maintenance for transitways beginning October 1st. And I should add that by September 30th, the bill also requires that any political subdivision, basically meaning a county, that where there hasn't been, where the operating funding hasn't been completely provided by that time, that has to take place before the changes made and those operating agreements are terminated on October 1st. So that's a big deal. And then one of the points here is that the council is prohibited from using the sales tax revenue to pay for the Southwest Light Rail projects until the Metro Governance Task Force concludes in 2024. That's was brought forward by Representative Hornstein, Senator Dibble. That's just how it goes. So,
Mr. Chair?
Is there a question?
What was that? Oh.
So I'm not sure you were clear enough. Were you saying that all past bills have to be paid? So if counties were withholding operating subsidies, or do they have to pay through the end of September? Or will you tell me more about the county's obligation to pay what by September 30th?
Mr. Chair and tab members, the idea is that any operational costs that the counties were expected to pay up until September 30th of 2023 needs to be paid by September 2023. Then it shifts over to the sales tax funding, all of that on October 1st.
And I'm sorry, but just the mechanics of that.
I think it just need to send a check.
Right, but how would you know what the subsidy is by September 30th at midnight? By September 30th at midnight?
I think, Mr. Chair and Commissioner, I think that we can certainly provide that. I don't know if our folks have talked to the folks at the different counties yet. I mean, this thing is still pretty warm, and so it's so some of that is having to be worked out. But I think in many cases there are master operating agreements that are in place, and they just need to be those funds that are needed to pay for the county share or whoever share need to be provided by September 30th before that gets changed. I can tell you, I can send you the language if you haven't seen it, but it's you're asking more about what's the mechanics of understanding what that specific amount is.
Well, it just doesn't, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, it just doesn't seem like it was very well thought out. There should have been some cutoff time and a due time that were different logistically, but whatever, it's a small point.
Yeah, I think the idea is, and I'm not going to speak for the transportation chairs when this bill was being negotiated. I think they just saw that when the sales tax takes effect on October 1st, that was the appropriate time to make the change from the counties paying their 50% share or whatever it was and transitioning to the sales tax, which is, I think at the time, everybody was thinking that made a lot of sense. I actually think it makes some sense. So we'll see where that goes. But Commissioner, I'm happy to sort that out with Dakota County. Speaking of the Metropolitan Council and governance, there was a bill. Folks may have noticed there was a lot of discussion about Met Council governance this last year at the legislature. It seems like there's always a lot of conversation about Met Council governance at the legislature. And this last year there was a bill to elect the Met Council. That bill ultimately did not happen, but what came out of that was that there's now going to be a Metropolitan Governance Task Force that is being led by the legislature. And so there is legislation that requires 4 members of the Senate, 4 members of the House, 2 members from the majority, 2 members from the minority. There'll be 1 representative from a city, 1 representative from a county, 1 representative from a township. I believe, if I recall, there is a representative from Move Minnesota, a representative from higher education, representative from the governor's office, and 2 members appointed by the Legislative Coordinating Commission who will work and take a look at multiple variety of potential governance ideas, all the way from elected to a council of governments to staggered terms to whatever. So there have been a number of task forces in the past. I know Commissioner Holberg and Mayor Williams spent a lot of time with me here recently looking at governance back in the end of 2020. And so I think that we'll probably continue having those conversations as well. But the legislature, or this group, is being asked to submit findings and recommendations to the legislature at the beginning of session for them to look at what they want to do with that here over the 2024 session. So stay tuned, and I'm sure I'll be back next year telling you about what happened there. But if anybody has questions about this, or you want to talk about it further, you can certainly reach out to me, and I can go into a little bit more detail on that if you would like. There was a bonding bill passed, and in that there was $72 million that advanced 3 arterial BRT lines for us, which we are very excited about. It allows us to complete the funding for the F line, which is running basically from the Northtown Center up in Blaine all the way down to Minneapolis. The G line, which is the Rice Street and Robert Street corridor here on the east side, and then the H line, which runs basically from Como Avenue, Minneapolis, through Maryland here in St. Paul. There was also $7 million that was put in the bill for the Apple Valley 147th Street Transit Station. There were a lot of policy items included into this bill. The first one, it's actually the first 2 are kind of rolled into each other, incorporated into each other. We had a bill related to administrative citations, which really did 2 things. First, it reduced the penalty from a misdemeanor to an administrative citation for someone who was not paying a fare, but that also allows the council to have someone other than a sworn officer be able to issue a ticket. And so that bill passed. We've been trying to pass it for 5 years, and here in the 5th year we were able to get it done. So we're very excited about that. It has the Transit Rider Investment Program that is the administrative citations bill, plus some more that relates to wanting to have more code of conduct activity to really look at the engagement between social services. It allows us to hire, again, people who necessarily aren't sworn officers to help assist our police officers as part of just being present on the platforms, on the trains, on the buses. And so we think that there is definitely a benefit to having more eyes and ears on the system. We spent a ton of time talking about transit safety here this last session, and so we are very happy with the new funding. When I mentioned there was a whole list of items that we need to use that new sales tax for investing in transit safety and rider safety. All of that is really rolled into that bill. We had a climate mitigation and adaptation legislation that was included in the transportation bill that incorporates portions of that into the council's regional development guide and comprehensive plans. We are there's a provision there related to MnDOT assistance with future light rail construction. We've got cleaning and repair standards for Metro Transit. And so we have to come out with a plan proposal by October 1st. Spent last Friday with Representative Hornstein and Senator Dibble with our folks at Metro Transit to talk about what that looks like. So that's exciting. We are extending reporting for our Southwest LRT expenditures. We'd already been doing that. That just continues. It has MnDOT doing a commuter rail extension assessment. Erik can talk about that. And then there was a provision that does not allow us to use any future CRISA funds, which are the COVID funds, that we cannot use that beyond what we put into the current Southwest line for that project. And so that just basically says that those funds cannot be used for that, and they'll be used for our operations. Commissioner.
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
I'm just wondering on the cleaning and repair standards, like what that applies to. Is that the stops, the rail, the sidewalks alongside, as I'm thinking about the Green Line and how incredibly filthy it is along University Avenue?
Mr. Chair and Commissioner, that is a conversation that we're having right now. I believe it has to do with, if I were looking at it, it would be about the transit property, the stations, the station areas, the buses, the trains, the shelters. And so I think it's kind of a whole cloth look at what that looks like. And in fact, I also believe it includes the rail track. We looked at how our, with the chairs, we looked at this device that we use basically to vacuum up all the garbage that falls between the stations on the tracks in between, which is filthy. Yeah. And it's also kind of dangerous because there's a lot of needles and things that nobody wants to be picking up, that we have this giant vacuum that can come through and pick up a lot of that. So to be completely honest with you, my eyes were opened a little bit about how we do this as well, and that was just last Friday. So we will happy to continue to talk about that, but I do know that we do have a pretty rigorous plan that we already do. One of the major issues that we have is finding people to do these jobs. And so we have a major workforce issue when it comes to all aspects of transit, the delivery of transit. And so, so we will see, we'll check back in on that, but I will say I think that the idea is to make sure that it applies to the whole system.
And if I may just follow on with the following question is, does that also apply to the landscaping, the greenery and repair and replacement of that along those ways?
Mr. Chair and members, I believe it does. Okay. I do know that one of the things that we spent a lot of time talking about last week was the damage to glass, and that we're looking at other ways to provide shelter without it necessarily being glass that can be smashed and become a major problem. If I remember right, we've had like over 500 glass incidents here just this year alone, and so I know that's not necessarily what you're talking about, but I do know that it's about the station and what that looks like, and so it would make sense that we would.
Okay, thanks.
Dan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question's about the plan of safety. But a segue to that is, when you have broken glass, trash, it's kind of like the broken window theory with police. If you repair those broken windows, I think it does have a positive impact on not having crime persist. Things get run down, and crime comes with it or is part of that. The Met Transit safety plan you described, granted, I don't expect you to have all the details worked out, but yeah. I think it'd be really informative. Probably everybody here would want to see where the money's being spent, the details of the plan, and hopefully you would go to the counties and cities along those routes and get their input. Are you going to have a plan by a certain date where the appropriations go, what the strategy is, and some level of detail?
Well, Mr. Chair and Commissioner, those are great questions, and we are are absolutely looking at all of that. I mean, this is, again, still very fresh. And so we do have a plan that is being led at Metro Transit. And so I think if you are interested in this, it would be I think worthwhile to have those folks come over here and talk about what that plan looks like. And I know that that is happening right now. I just can't sit here and give you the detail on
No
it.
problem. I believe in the investment. I
Yep.
think getting safety restored is the key to getting transit ridership restored, so.
We are like-minded on that, and I can assure you that it will be a very robust plan. I believe that we have been to the council here recently talking about some of that as well. And so I will talk to Elaine, and if the committee is really interested in it, we'd be happy to come back and just give a presentation on what that looks like and what we're going to be able to do with these new funds.
Thank you.
Again, I'm just gonna say, and I said this all session long at the Capitol, the biggest issue that we have is workforce and being able to make sure that we can find the folks to do this. I mean, we have our police force at full strength is about 171 officers. Right now, I believe we're about at 107. And then we're trying to find these trip personnel or the transit and kind of advocates, representatives, and I think we are I think at full strength there, we're looking to have about 75, and I think we are maybe in the teens. And so it's one of those things that putting it into effect will make the big difference, but we just need to have the workforce in order to do that, and hopefully that will happen here sooner than later, because I can assure you we're very like-minded on these issues.
Thank you.
Member Barber.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to respond to a couple of the questions and add to things, and Judd can tell me if I'm wrong on anything. First to Commissioner Castile, for some of the, especially environmental, the landscaping, some of that's done by local entities, so I think we have to talk about how we're doing this. Even if you look in the light rails, there are certain stations that have had upgrades that have been facilitated by certain cities or things like that. I look on the Green Line, that some of those decisions were made. And how do we do that going forward? It's a great question to ask, because I think that we want to put our best foot forward, and so definitely has to be some element of partnership for all of that. It's going to kind of leverage over to the question from Commissioner Karwoski. So we actually, with the transit service and intervention program, it actually was required to launch on June 1st. And so we have launched at least elements of it, and it's really meant to be a cross-functional approach that pulls in not just law enforcement and improvements of the look and the feel and the facilities, but also involving other outside organizations, social services, mental health organizations, different things, because we know what's happening on, especially on our trains, is really societal issues that are being concentrated in a particular area, with a lot of things that we as a transit agency don't necessarily handle. So there have been lots of conversations with the counties. There will be continued conversations with the counties, because especially that social service aspect is not something we're doing. We have been working with NAMI and some other community groups, but this is really sort of the kickoff, and I know that we're getting reports at council and they have to go to the legislature. We're happy to bring some of that back here, but just know that like when some of these things have been asked in a very short time, I really have to give some kudos to Metro Transit, especially the leadership of our interim general manager, Leslie Canderas, to stand something up when the legislature adjourned at last week of May, and we had to have a program in place by June 1st. She did it, and I think we can't say enough. It's going to take a bit before we see all the impacts of it, but it's really been quite the effort. So, back to Jen.
Thank you.
Well, I agree with Councilmember Barber's comments. That's great. And it was an extremely short time frame, and we were able to pull multiple groups from very, very broad spectrum of cities, counties, social services groups, nonprofits together in order to get that started. So that was great. I'll just skip to my next slide here. Folks may or may not be interested, but there was a bill passed that is required every 10 years to redistrict the Metropolitan Council. And so that bill passed, and you'll see the new districts, and I fully expect that the governor will be making appointments to the new districts here, in the next, hopefully, month or so. So, other than that, I can get into way more detail on any of this if you're interested, or I can pass it over to Eric and let him get you up to speed on it.
I got two here, I got a question
Great.
here and there.
I just have one last comment because you like to hear me talk so much, but I will be very quick. Redistricting, I'm sure Chair, you'll agree that District 4 continues to be the coolest district on the map. So we're very happy to see that. And but also I want to really, first of all, just talk about we're very excited about what we're seeing in this funding. We're realistic that we have additional funds that we're required to spend, so a lot more obligations, so we have to be realistic. In the next few months, we'll get a better understanding what the ongoing actual financial implications are. The best thing that I can say over and over is we no longer have a structural deficit going into the future, which you've all heard me say those words way too many times over my tenure at council, so we're really thankful for that part. But we are sorting through the rest of the dollars and what it means and what it actually will mean for the long-term impact. Before I turn it over to someone else, I do want to thank Judd. He did an outstanding job. Thank you very much for always advocating on us. And also a shout out to Charles Carlson and Leslie Canderas from MTS and Metro Transit, who were there a lot, and I know it was a very long session. So, thank you.
For Geisler?
Thanks, Chair. Ms. Schetnan, just a question for the 8 of us who are around the table. Do the letter districts for TAB citizen reps change as far as their number assignments? Or are we still going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6? Because obviously these boundaries change.
The numbers, they stay the same. However, I think some of the numbers within the Met Council district changed. Does that make sense? So some of the, so that it's still 1, 2 are District A, 3, 4 are B. I think that what you saw is in the new Met Council districting, that some of the new district numbers have adjusted a little bit geographically. Does that make sense? I mean, because the districts changed, so the numbers changed a little. They're still 16, but they're not necessarily, number 7 isn't necessarily where number 7 was in the previous 10 years.
Okay.
So my understanding is, just to dig a little deeper here, is I don't believe that there were any pairings of current MAC members and I don't believe that there are any open seats. So I think that the way that the map works is that the current MAC members are still able to maintain their seats.
I guess I'm asking for the TAB citizen.
Oh, for the tab. Oh, excuse me. I thought you said MAC.
No, yeah.
Well, if anybody from the MAC is here, I hope they explain that for them. As far as the tab, I don't know.
So the letter, but so far the A's aren't going to.
Yes, I swear you said tab. Not only did I forget my glasses, I guess I can't hear today either. So I don't know. Happy to follow up with Elaine on that, and I can explain. We can get into that. We just spent all of our time talking about the Met Council districts and then the MAC districts, so I apologize for that. Cheapers.
So any changes wouldn't be effective till next year, correct?
No, they would take effect here soon, I think within 60 days of the bill passing. And so, go ahead, Nick. Go ahead, Charles.
Just real quick on the TAB districts, we have started the process, we have begun discussing the process of appointments. And so when we make new appointments, I think we'd begin to reflect the new districts. We do need to sort out what happens with current appointments that go through the continued term. For council members, they continue to serve the district that they're serving now until the new appointments occur. So I'd anticipate we do that, but doing that for several years doesn't really make sense. So it's something we'll sort through. Thank you.
And I'll just add a little bit more detail. If people are interested, you're probably not. But the districts for the Met Council seats, each district represents roughly 197.5 people. And so that is a growth. Each district grew by about 10% over the course of the last 10 years. So the idea was to not make significant changes unless it was necessary, and to also keep similar type communities together, and then not try to split communities unless it was absolutely necessary in order to make sure that the deviation on those districts was small. And so this bill was carried by Senator Ann Rest and Representative Mike Freiberg. And so if there's other questions related to that, I'm happy to follow up with you separately. But other than that, happy to take any questions, or you can call me, email me. We can talk about this offline if you'd like. Otherwise, I stand for whatever questions you might have. But there was a lot in this bill that I didn't cover as well, so.
Okay, he was first. Go ahead.
So, thank you, Mr. Chair. My first question was actually taken by Member Geisler, so I'll move to my second one. And I probably should have asked it earlier, but on slide 4, when you talked about the sales tax, on your second bullet, or actually, yeah, your second major bullet, expected revenue,
Yep.
is that total revenue for the sales tax? Is that revenue to the Met Council? Whose revenue are you citing in that second bullet?
I believe that is the revenue to the Metropolitan Council.
Okay, so that's the 83% of the total? Okay.
Yep. And so I can just tell you, over 10 years, we estimate that the sales tax will generate about $4.73 billion. And so that is the council's share. That is the 83%. The full amount is $5.50 billion over the next 10 years. And so 17% of that goes to the counties, 83% comes to the Metropolitan Council, 5% of that 83% goes to the tab, 95% of the 83% goes to the Met Council for all of the items that were listed in the bill. And there's a list of 13 items that we have to spend that money on, specifically on top of taking over the transit way operations and capital maintenance.
Okay, thank you.
So real briefly, this 83-17 split, and then the offsetting bill, if you will, to the 50% operating subsidy to the county, given that the tax is implemented in all 7 counties, and 3 of the 7 counties had no obligation for operating subsidies, that being Scott, Carver, and the other one on the west.
Right.
No.
Washington?
So Dakota, or five had either current or upcoming subsidies. I'm sorry, only 2. So Scott and Carver have no offset of liability. Dakota County's is very minimal in that it was a portion of the 50% of the orange line for, I think, a total of 7% of the total operating costs. And then substantial relief to Hennepin and Ramsey, and proportionately to Anoka, given their liability on North Star and the size of their county. I'd like to see some kind of charter analysis. I'm sure you've already run all the numbers as far as dollar and percent. I mean, Dakota County is going to be contributing $66 million a year. We'll receive some of the 17% back, and very little relief on the operating end of things. Talk a little bit about, where that goes, and then if you could send out a grid or a analysis of where we are today as far as liabilities, and then given how much money is being taken from each county, what their direct or indirect benefit back would be as a result of that, or not.
Sounds good. Mr. Chair, Commissioner Holberg, I don't have all of that detail, but I do know that with the operating relief that is being provided, that there is, the numbers that were being used at the end of session was that the Met Council was taking on roughly $883 million over the next 10 years of operating expectations that were to be provided previously by the counties. And so I know for Hennepin County, it was about $660 million that would have previously come from the county. Ramsey County was about 133, Anoka County was 69, Dakota County was about 5 million, and Washington County was 17 million. This is just the operating. So there's a whole nother side of this related to the capital maintenance piece of it. But I think one of the things to keep in mind is that what changed here specific to Hennepin County was the shift to where in 2017, that bill said, the language basically said that the state was not paying for the operations of that line or capital maintenance. And now with this shift, the council's paying 100% of it and the capital maintenance. So that's why I think that number is looking so large there. So that was a big shift as part of that. But we are doing an analysis of this of the sales tax that we are doing internally. We're also working with an accounting firm to just get a better handle on what all of this looks like. That I don't know how soon we'll have it, but we're trying to take our time and do a really deep take on that. I'm going to stop here and turn it over to our transportation chair here, but that's something that we can work on.
And if I might, I'm asking that you keep tab members informed. There's a variety of opinions on whether this was good or bad for various subregions. And as policymakers determining how monies should be spent and distributed, I think it's very important that members of this committee have the opportunity to kind of take a deep dive of the impacts of where money's coming from, where it's going to, et cetera. And so I know you have some of it already done on a 10,000-foot level, what you could share in the short term, and then keep us up to date.
Yep, and I will just say that, just before I turn it over to Councilmember Barber, is that, there is a whole another side to this with the MnDOT road money that's coming into this as well. So the bill does a lot. I'm giving you about half of the picture here. And
Right, but I mean, for context sake,
Yep.
the entire levy of Dakota County is $142 million a year. A 3/4 cent sales tax out of Dakota County is $66 million a year. $66 million a year is being taken out of the economy, which is nearly half of what our whole levy. I mean, it's a lot of money, and I think people need to have an understanding of what's happening.
Fair point.
And just to kind of add on to what Judd was saying, we are doing a really full financial analysis, which I think is really a big part of it, because I mean, there was a lot in here, a lot in and a lot out, and we need to balance all of that. And because I keep tempering expectations of making sure, yes, there's a lot of good funding. We have a lot more obligations, and we have to be honest about that. And I think the other big thing is, especially with this accounting analysis, is how do we manage the long-term capital maintenance infrastructure? When you look at the blue line, which is 20 years old, there's a lot of actual capital maintenance. And so do we build up some sort of revolving fund or something that takes care of that, so future groups don't have to sit and try and figure out how to patch this? So there's a lot of both business and strategic kinds of decisions to be made. So yeah, we'll happily bring, at least with the results of the analysis, so that we know what money is available to build things. I think it has implications to decisions we make here around this table. So I think it's important for everyone to really see that. So I'd rather be as transparent about it as possible.
And I'm gonna add one more thing to that, just because I've worked at the legislature for many years, and I will say that this is fantastic. And I think that what Deb is saying is right, that we do not have a structural deficit. However, we receive a substantial amount of money from MVest, which is very volatile. So when we look at the long-term picture, we're building in the variability in that. And I also want people to be aware that we do receive general fund from the state as well. And that general fund is always on the table. Every 2 years, you go back to the legislature. So our analysis and what it looks like has significant risk and variability in that as well. And when you add that on top of what our new responsibilities are in statute, it looks great, but it's also, we're taking on a lot. And I just want to make sure that everybody understands that there's a lot that the council is all of a sudden taking responsibility for. So with that, go ahead, Deb.
Just final comment. I also just going to say, thank you. We're very excited about this. I'm sorry. I'd like I'm not trying to rain on Judd's parade.
No, you're good.
But I'm just very practical about these things. I think I come from business, so I know you have to balance both sides of things. But it is very nice to have a very different conversation about this than we've had historically. And so it is very exciting, and we're very thankful for the legislation that passed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. And while our next is coming up, and if we could maybe move that one along quickly, we got a lot of information to go through. I didn't mention, obviously, I'm not Jim. Jim's, I got a notice this morning early that Jim's not gonna be here, so please bear with me. We're working through this, this all happened fast, so. All right, with that, if you could get through yours, we got a lot of information today, so thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I'll try to be fairly quick. I'm Erik Rudeen with MnDOT Government Affairs. The big thing for us, early in session, we were the 6th bill to the governor's desk to get $315 million in budget authority to spend the federal IIJA funds on the trunk highway system. So that was a big relief to us. The matching funds for IIJA, we got $0 out of last legislative session for IIJA matching funds, so we were excited to get a whole bunch this year. You know, it was a very, as we were just talking about, a historic transformational bill, a lot of focus on climate change, EVs, active transportation, NLX, which has been around for several years. That's the passenger rail line to Duluth from Minneapolis. It's not technically a climate change project, but it's kind of in that vein of transit projects. And then we already talked about the metro sales tax. So there was a whole lot in the capital investment bills for local roads and bridges. You can see the dollar figures there. Kind of an expanding theme at the legislature is earmarks for road projects. So there were a whole bunch of earmarks in these programs. There were also trunk highway earmarks. And then you can see the detail there, the last bullet, the Teddy program.
Your top numbers don't add up.
Oh, so it's 85 for the local roads, plus the earmarks, plus there's an additional 18 in the transportation bill for the local road improvement program. So you have to add 85 plus 18 for the general local road improvement program, and then add 146.5 million on top of that if you want the total local road funding just in the capital investment bill. But it gets a little confusing because the 18 million was in the transportation bill, but it's going to the same program that's usually funded in the capital investment bill. And the last program that is Transportation Economic Development Infrastructure. So this is the general fund piece that goes through Department of Employment and Economic Development to match with the trunk highway piece that flows through MnDOT. So for the first time, cities under 5,000 will get dedicated ongoing funding. Because of this bill, there's been a couple special one-time appropriations in previous years for small cities. Just to go back to local roads and bridges, we would anticipate doing a solicitation probably this fall for the local road improvement program. Hopefully we could announce things in the spring. And then there's about 30 million on the waiting list for the local bridge program, but usually once cities and counties and townships hear there's money available, those applications start coming in pretty quickly. You know, I will, just going back to another theme about how much was in this bill, it's gonna take us some time to kind of work through and implement some of this, these new programs. And there were almost, I think, 70 earmarks between the transportation bill and the capital investment bill. That's like way more than we've ever had in the past. So just getting those grant agreements in place with local governments is gonna take some time to work through. And on the road and bridge side, you can see the new revenues we have. So we anticipate the indexing, the gas tax will be about a 5-cent gas tax over the next 4 years. That is the MnDOT construction cost index, but it can never go higher than 3% in any 1 year. So we probably will usually be at that 3% level. And then we talked about the MVEST. So this new transportation advancement account is where the money from the delivery fee will go to. And then the sales tax and auto parts will be fully phased in over a 10-year period. And you can see the amount going to the highway user fund. And then the phase-in is really for the transportation advancement account piece. So that'll take some time to get fully phased in. And it'll be interesting to see what the delivery fee does, if it impacts people's behavior. I mean, if you're doing an order of $100, will you split that into two $75 orders to avoid the fee, or you know, does 50 cents not make that big a difference if you're doing an order that big? But we'll see. And then you can see the distribution there, including, as I mentioned earlier, the small cities assistance at 27%. So we have a big pot of money specifically dedicated to match federal grants. That's $216.4 million. You can get up to $10 million per project out of that pot of money. And that's for anything. That can be trunk highways, it can be an airport project, it can be a transit project, it can be anything you get a federal grant for, basically. And then there's also this $2 million that MnDOT will administer for local governments and tribes and MPOs if you need technical assistance applying for one of these grants. You can see the electric vehicle infrastructure and credits if you want to buy a new electric vehicle. There's also $4 million for electric bicycles, if you would like to buy an electric bicycle, and then really large amounts of money for active transportation and the Safe Routes to School program. And then I think this is my last slide. So $600 million in trunk highway bonding. I should just mention on corridors of commerce, this will be added to the $200 million that was appropriated 2 years ago, and we will hopefully announce those projects soon. It's taking us some time to work through that. There's new language about regional balance, and so there's now a 3-tiered system. There's what we're calling the Metro Core, or the 494, 694 Beltway, and everything inside of that is one category. Then there's another category that will be outside the Beltway, the rest of the 7-county metro, plus Chisago, Isanti, Sherburne, and Wright County is in that second tier. And then the rest of Minnesota is everything beyond that. So just taking us a little time to work through that, and then a bunch of the projects that had applied for corridors funding also got earmarks. So now we're having to go through and subtract out all these earmarks before we figure out who gets how much money. Another big sort of high-profile item was this greenhouse gas working group and mitigation. And so these provisions don't go into effect until 2025. But if you have an expansion project, which means building an interchange or adding a lane, you have to go through this analysis, and if you're gonna increase GHG or vehicle miles traveled, you now will have to mitigate for those impacts. So there's a large working group that's been, that will be set up to kind of work through that and see if we need to make any adjustments to the legislation even before it goes into effect, because we'll have the 2024 session to potentially do that before they go into effect in 2025. And then finally, you know, we're certainly grateful for this funding. We're going to do a lot of good things with it, but our 20-year MnChip, we're estimating up to $27 billion of unmet need over the next 20 years, and we got maybe a quarter or a third of the way there. So we're going to still have challenges with transportation funding, but I'll stop there and see if there are any questions.
Questions? Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just want to make a comment regarding the greenhouse gas and vehicle miles travel assessment mitigation and working group. That's gonna, in my opinion, has to be something that we really need to focus on when we're revamping the regional solicitation ranking, because that's going to be a massive component of any road project that's going to be coming in front of us. So we just want to prepare the group for when that's coming in 2025.
Thank you. Anyone else? Thank you. Thanks for coming. All right, for the sake of time, unless the other committee reports really have something they need to report today, could you just send your information to Elaine, and Elaine will get it out so that we can keep moving, and we have a lot on our plate. So I don't know if any of the chairs have anything that need to be brought up today. If not, please send the information. Deb?
I literally have a 30-second one. So today we're doing an event called A Great Day in Transit, It's from 1 to 6 today, and we have people, staff at stations along the Metro green and blue lines, and, helping staff, talking to customers. If you get a chance, go out, say hi, say thank you, tell some of our frontline staff you appreciate them. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. All right, next we'll approve the previous meeting minutes from May 17th.
So moved, Anderson.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Discussion. Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same. Motion carries. We move to consent items. Now remember, we only have item number 1, which is 2023-35 and that. Yes.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair and board members. So moving into the consent agenda item 2023-35. This is a streamlined tip amendment, which is adding 2 new projects to the tip. The first project is a 2.7-mile reconstruction of CASA 33 in the urbanized area of Sherburne County. This project's funded with Service Transportation Block Grant Program funds, not regional solicitation funding. So this does need to be reflected in the tip. And the second new project is a bus garage expansion for Minnesota Valley Transit in Burnsville, funded with discretionary FTA funding. None of these are regional solicitation
Questions?
related.
I'll move it, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Second. I have a motion and a second to approve consent. Discussion. Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same. Motion carries. All right, moves us to non-consent. And our first item is 2023-36, and that's the amended one.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair and board members. So in this amended action item, we are amending the tip and 2 existing projects in the tip for cost increases, and one of those projects has a scope change that goes with that cost increase. So the first item is the item that relates to the amended page that you were all given. And it's a MnDOT project to rehabilitate and repair the Stone Arch Bridge in Minneapolis. It's funded with Surface Transportation Block Grant Program funds, and the tip amendment is to advance some of those funds, clarify that there's funding from legislative GO bonds, and amending some of the program years associated with these funds. And then the second item on this tip amendment is for a bridge replacement project along Minnesota 65, National Highway Performance Program funding. There's a cost increase that's related to the scope change, which is adding another bridge replacement with this project.
All right, questions? Yes.
My biggest question is, in the documentation we got, nothing is said about why the Stone Arch Bridge is going to cost twice what it was originally slated at, the repairs. Can you address what the cost increases are for?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and board member. I'm going to defer to Sheila for that.
Thank you, Chair, members. This was a recent add. What we understand is this work is for the underwater portion of the Stone Arch Bridge, which is, again, underwater. As the water goes down, we found out it was more expensive.
Okay.
So the scope of the effort, initial scope of the effort is the same, but it's additional work due to the underwater portion of it.
Okay.
So, yep.
Anyone else questions for Jen?
I'll move it, Mr. Chair.
Okay, I have a motion
Second.
and a second. Discussion. Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same. Carries. All right, moves us to 2023-30.
Okay, Mr. Chair, members of the board, 2023-30 is a program year change request for 4 local projects that are associated with the Highway 252 I-94 project, which is being administered by MnDOT. This is a joint request from the cities of Brooklyn Center, Brooklyn Park, Hennepin County, and MnDOT to move these 4 regionally selected projects from their current program year, which is 2026, to 2029. The 4 projects were selected over the course of 3 regional solicitations, and all 4 projects have already received 1 program year extension. So the motion that's before you today is to move these projects from program year 2026 to 2029, noting that this is an exception to our current policy. The current program year policy allows for 1 program year extension of 1 year. So a one-time 1-year extension is what the current policy allows for. However, these 4 projects are now part of the larger effort on 252 and 94. This is a regionally significant kind of mega project being administered by MnDOT. And through the environmental review process, the FHWA has deemed these 4 local projects as connected actions with the larger project. And so even if these project sponsors were able to move their projects forward based on the work that they've done on their own projects, they would not be able to receive that authorization from the FHWA because of this environmental review process. So TAC has unanimously recommended approving the policy exception and the program year extension for these 4 local projects. And I'll happy to answer any questions. I do know that we have project sponsors here for the local projects as well as MnDOT staff to help answer any questions.
Let's take floor questions first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to point out there was some robust discussion, really good discussion, I think, about an extension, and I think it should have robust discussion because it's an exception. And I think some of the concerns were about, serial projects and then a mega project. None of these were that before. None of those. They were standalone projects. That's something that came out in the conversation, which was very enlightening to us. So there were standalone projects, and then the Corridors of Commerce money came. And we don't want to nobody wants to turn that down. In this particular area, too, there's huge issues with accidents and also public safety. And so we need to rectify that. And it makes sense to put these together. And without putting together, they won't go. And so turning this away could be pretty detrimental to that area. And I just don't, it would be a long time to get these things back up on the table to get this done. They also ended up having a federal EIS tacked onto the project because of a project size. When a project grows to a specific size, it has to go do the larger EIS, which takes a significant amount of time, which adds to the project. If anybody's done large projects, they know that the Mall of America was one of those projects, any of those big expansion projects or any of those. And so that's beyond anybody's control. So I feel like it's applicable for them to ask for this extension and an exception to that rule, and I'm in favor of that. And I know that Chad Ellis from the county is here, and I believe the Brooklyn Park City Engineer is also here in the back if there's other questions that people wanted to ask.
Member Anderson.
I agree with Member Guttel's comments. I think, this is a pretty major corridor in terms of moving traffic from county to county. We've certainly got some challenges in that area and always have. And there is a lot of safety issues along 252 and 610. And I see this as, I think we ought to have a discussion at some point in time about the exceptions. I don't think today is necessarily that day to have that. I think this injects a little common sense into our process, and it's an opportunity, it's a happenstance, and I also would, in fact, I'll make a motion to recommend approval.
I'll second.
So we have changes things rather quickly. We have a motion and a second. Now, I'm still going to open it up for discussion. People that might still have an opportunity or would like to speak on this motion. So with that, is there anyone else that would like to speak regarding the motion? I will just tell you that there was a lot of discussion, about how do we, look at a project like this. It's already had an extension, and I agree you have to look at all the circumstances. But how do we know that in 3 years it's going to be there? How do we, so those are kind of, I'll just throw out some of the items that we talked about. What guarantees do we have that in 3 years that it's going to happen? And then if it doesn't happen, what happens? It's a lot of money, but Member Geisler explained it very eloquently, saying that the Corridors of Commerce gave was 120 million. And if we turn down 26 million, what happens to 120 million? So there's a lot tied to this project, but yet we as a group still need to figure out how do we go about with extensions? And Member Anderson said it, you can't, this isn't the place to have that conversation today because our problems still exist. But we have to figure out, are we willing to say, yeah, let's go ahead and move this forward? Or do we say, nah, we're not so certain? So again, I'll just turn it back. Is there anyone question? Member Barber. Oh, I'm sorry, wait. Member Barber.
I'm just gonna kind of add on to your, part of the conversation was this is an extension out to 2029, and this is $26 million. Is there an opportunity that they can apply again in the future? And that money go back into the program, or do we hold it over for that length of time? And I'll let our staff fix anything I said, but I think that was part of our discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, I'll just add a little bit of the other conversation points. The whole idea, you know, behind policies that it never covers everything. There will be exceptions. That's why we exist as a body to make decisions around exceptions. And exceptions are there for when there's a whole bunch of extenuating circumstances. These 4 projects independently never contemplated being part of a large Corridors of Commerce project when they applied in the first place. Nor did they expect to have an environmental impact study put on top of them, on top of the already environmental work that they were planning on. And you know, as we've talked about, there is a need here. So when I think about what TAB does, it's thinking about regionally significant improvements, stewarding our funds, and making sure they're going to the right places. You know, as far as, you know, would we have approved a project that was asking for money over 10 years from now? Off the bat, no, but nobody contemplated that when it happened, and there's a whole bunch of pieces that kind of stacked up against them. I do, to the chair's point, I do believe that, you know, if we deny the extension, it adds another complication to this project, but there's still need. There's still need to happen here. There's a reason why it got funded by Corridors of Commerce. There's a reason why these 4 PED safety improvements are there. And so, you know, and just speaking simply as a citizen, as I have said before, don't tear up a roadway for a decade. If you can do it in a shorter, more consolidated time frame that's less impactful to the citizens, let's try to do that. If that means it comes later, it means it comes later. But again, I think this is a good example of why we need to be able to make exceptions when they show up for a bunch of good reasons.
Nobody else?
Well, just a quick one. I fully support this. You know, it sounds to me like it's a sense of collaboration. And I think we're always looking for that, to coordinate a project. So you can't predict it. I think the one way to judge it is you approve it. Does it come together? Is it built now with all that funding? For some reason it wasn't to happen, fall apart, then you'd have something to, I think, a stronger argument about this kind of collaboration and putting these kind of funds together in this unique opportunity, I guess.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, this is a really tough one because the need is extremely there. I have a similar corridor in my city that if I was in a similar position, I would be begging for an extension because it's that needed. I have a really hard time, having said that, providing, there's exceptions to every rule, but this is an exception upon an exception upon an exception. If we haven't talked about or come up with a policy or a general policy on those exceptions, it's really hard to make that determination when there are other projects that have been excluded from the regional solicitation because of these extensions. I'm saying it sounds as if it's going to be approved, which is great, which I support Hennepin County and Brooklyn Center and Brooklyn Park in this, but I guess my suggestion would be to not approve the extension, but when the projects actually do come up to be constructed, there is a priority given to these 4 intersections to ensure that they get the, you know, the spotlight that they deserve because they qualified at a previous date. I just, with this extension, it pains me to think of the projects that aren't gonna get funded when they're so needed as well today.
And I'd like to respond to Member Jepson's, because that's a big concern, and actually came up in the executive committee too. We had that, but what we were also told, with all the other money coming in, and a lot of these projects coming to fruition that we had not anticipated or expected, we may see something like this again. So exactly what you said, there isn't a policy, and that's why we decided that that's one of the things we need to do, is come together about a policy, so that when we have to handle exceptions, and there will be some, that we have some more guide rails around those exceptions, because I think we're going to see more of them. We've only seen a few of them in our past, and we have had them before, but not many. So this is not the normal, and so I don't think we'll see necessarily a whole lot, but we might see more, just to let everybody around the table know.
So that just brings back concern that if we make this decision without the policy, how do we do that? Make that decision without a policy in place, even though it's few and far between? Knowing that there are gonna be other projects that come up that we're gonna have to not fund because this 26 million is already spoken for.
Mr. Chair, I see that the city engineer is here and would like to speak and try to answer some of those concerns. Please.
State your name, please, and affiliation.
Welcome.
Mr. Chair, members, thank you for the opportunity. I'm Jesse Struve. I'm the city engineer for Brooklyn Park. One of the concerns that we have is now that this big project is in the STIP, that if our extension is not granted today, that we would not be allowed to reapply later on for regional solicitation funds, and therefore lose that $26 million. And then that would have to be made up by the local share, which again would be a good hardship on both Brooklyn Park and Brooklyn Center. So that was the one main concern that we have without getting this extension today.
Yeah, I gotta clarify that. Why would you not be able to reapply?
Because it's in, now that this large project on 252 is included in the STIP, regional planning, that then our individualized projects at each of the intersections then would not be considered individual projects, and therefore then would be lumped into with 252, which then, yes, we could maybe get one with 252, but we would not be able to get each of the individualized applications.
Okay.
That's because the FHWA now considers them one project. So if they did not, they would withdraw all 4. Maybe you get 2 with the pedestrian, but the 3 roadway ones would have to come in as one project application.
Correct. That is Brooklyn Park's understanding of what would happen.
So I'm going to vote in favor of this, but I think it's largely because this is a problem not of the applicants making in a number of ways, and it's actually a problem of the Met Council's making in some significant ways, and the FHWA. So these are all things that are outside of the applicant's control. Part of this is that when these projects got linked together by the Fed, they became one thing. When the corridors of commerce funding, which I wasn't here for, so I had no insight into that, but when that was a separate Met Council action that led to that. So we've kind of boxed them in, right? That's my feeling. So that's why I'm going to support this, but I was the one that I think was the first one to raise the question that we need to revisit our policy. We really need to revisit our policy and make sure that we're staying in alignment, because these kinds of projects, I suspect, are going to become more common, of cobbling together funds from across multiple jurisdictions. And that's a good thing, because it means that we're actually thinking regionally about our transportation system, which is partly what we're supposed to be doing here. So anyway, I think that's just to Julie's question about why would we do this, and is that not putting us on a slippery slope? I don't think it is, because I think we can point to some very specific constraints here that would not be the case, and will not be the case in another one that we're going to visit shortly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to take a little point of issue with blaming council. Part of our job is actually to advocate for projects for the region, which Corridors of Commerce was one of those projects. And this was a project that MnDOT couldn't apply for, but Met Council could to get the funding. Now we're in a strange situation because the different communities also had projects that were important that connected to this, that tied in. So it's that effort of cobbling things together. I do think, in particular, as we look at how we look at these exceptions going forward, I think we do need to look at a policy. We do need to keep some flexibility with extension year, or allowing extension years, because that's going to happen. There's always those things with projects. But then how we deal with exceptions, I think, is going to become more common. You heard some of the conversations today from the legislative updates, whether it's the federal funds, whether it's the state's funds. There's more money coming into the region. I think we're likely to see more of these things coming up. And so we do need to standardize what we're doing going forward.
I just, we always talk about we need to upgrade the policy, but yet these are all about things that are out of people's controls. And if we don't still give ourselves that ability, we're really not doing our job either. So it's a challenge, and I get it both ways about, I struggle giving out, saying, hey, 10 years worth of money is being put out there, but it's just, the thing just kind of morphed and just kept growing and became this giant mega project, and out of anyone's really thoughts. But we do need to look at that, but I'm not sure how we're gonna fix it other than what it is now, where we discuss and look at the project and look at the merits of why and what happened. But we're gonna have to do it as we move forward. Peter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will be voting in favor of the exception, primarily, as addressing Mr. Martin, Member Martin said, it's not the applicant's fault, particularly that the FHWA made this into one major environmental project. Secondly, we do need to revisit the policy, but this reminds me, this is going to be a stretch here, a little bit of an experimental drug, trial, where, 3 years from now, you're going to be okay, but today you need it, and so today they need it. And when we'll get to the policy, I'm not sure, but in the executive session, which I'm not a member, but I was listening to, there were two really excellent comments on the $26 million would just be parked, if you will, for about, 6-7 years. And then in 2029, will the project be ready? Or is it just going to run into more? And it just, I guess that, I bring that up only for the visiting the policy or enacting a new policy later on. And Elaine, may I ask, would you explain again why they couldn't reapply because of the,
It's become one big project.
They have
you
become,
couldn't apply as one policy? I mean, one project?
well, they received funding as 4 projects.
Right.
So if they withdrew because they are now one project, they could not each individual 4 projects reapply. So they would get less funding. The maximum would be like the 10 million expansion, where they each had, there's 3 of them was.
Does the FHWA, Mr. Chair, may I follow up?
Yep.
Thank you. Does the FHWA overrule us in the sense of, we said it's 4 projects. They're making it 1, we're not. So I'm not.
They were individually 4 projects. Now that they're with the Corridors of Commerce project.
Oh, the Corridors of
They are
Commerce,
now.
right.
They have to stay.
Thank you. Yes, thank you.
And then also to revise some of the 26 million will not be parked. It will then be allocated to other projects. These projects will get 2029 funding.
Off the top?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, thank you. And
Steve, did you have something? Oh, okay.
And if I may, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
And then the idea, and I think it was you, Mr. Chair, who brought it up, that, will it be ready in 3 years, 4 years, 5 years? Or, will we be back here again? I guess. Not saying that we don't, I'm still going to vote in favor, but that for the enacting a new policy, we'll have to consider that type of thing if we're going to be having major projects like this. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a question regarding the discussion on exemptions and the policy. Can we push pause on this until we wrap that up? And the reason I say that is I'm having difficulty wanting to vote yes, and it's not because I don't have massive empathy for your area. Anytime dollars in mass quantity come north of 694, us in the northern community say, yay, thanks for acknowledging that our roads need help too. And for someone who's been an elected official in a community who spent the last 20 years trying to get money for infrastructure that we're just seeing now, 20 years after the fact, I have massive empathy. But also as an elected official, I also know that when we do things without policy enacted, without solid policy, we set precedent. And there's always unintended consequence. And that's the only thing I don't want, is to be having this discussion with another project who says, well, you gave so-and-so an exemption and you did this, even though they'd already been given one exemption. So that would be my ask, is can we push pause? Is there a timeline on acting on this $26 million? I understand it will be allocated for future use in 2029, but the dollars will still be used in the meantime. But I mean, it just seems a little out of order to me to make a decision on a policy by voting yes or no without discussing the actual policy.
Mr. Chair, could one of our staff come up, because there are some implications on timing?
Well, we do have a policy. This would just be the exception.
The exception, that's what I'm
We
referring
do
to.
exception.
Yes, thank you.
But we have that ability.
Yeah, we have that ability. It's in the policy.
We want to make an exemption to the exception.
No, this is, we already have an
This is
exception
the
in the
exception.
policy.
We're allowed to do
Yeah,
that.
thanks, Mr.
Yeah.
Chair. Yeah,
For 1 year.
we've done a few of these exceptions over the years, kind of in rare occurrence. It's better to do it now when you have more time. We're planning to bring this policy back to the technical committee starting in August. So that will be kind of a fall activity, I'll call it, for the tab, to look at this policy and make some changes to it. But a few of these items today do tie together, so that you'll see as we get into the protect item, which is number 3 on the list here, some of that money from these other actions does impact how we play out the protect. And so that's, a few of these are tied together from that sense of tabling it and waiting a few months. So just offer that, you know, we got a couple things that are playing together here and over the next couple action items.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Geisler.
Hey, Mr. Chair, I think from just the exception standpoint, I think if any project wants to sign up for environmental impact statement, to go through all that process and rigor to get an extra couple of years, I think we don't welcome it, but I don't think anybody's gonna sign up for that. There's a lot of very big reasons on this one, that just really make it clear in my mind, compared to, you know, we ran out of here, or we changed our plans kind of discussions.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to call a question.
All right, the question's been called. We have a motion and a second
Second.
on the floor. We don't need the motion and second, though.
No, we already
Question?
have.
Yeah, all right. Okay. All right, and we've had all of our discussion. So with that, all in favor of approving, we'd be approving the extension. Say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. All right, I gotta find my report. All right, so that was 36, right? So we go to 20, that was 30. All right, so 2023-31 now is our next one.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a very similar action item. It's a program year change request from the city of Brooklyn Park for a roadway project along CASA 103. It's a roadway reconstruction project. The city of Brooklyn Park is requesting the program year extension to go from 2025 to 2026. The project was selected in the 2018 regional solicitation and has already been granted a program year extension. The requested action is for an exception to the program year policy in order to grant this program year extension. This project is closely tied to the Blue Line LRT extension project. So the extension would align or better align the timing of the roadway reconstruction project with the light rail project and two other regional solicitation projects that Brooklyn Park has been awarded that are already sitting in 2026. This is a roadway reconstruction where the LRT would be in the middle of the road, so it's very much an interconnected construction effort between the roadway reconstruction and the LRT construction. So due to these extenuating circumstances, TAC unanimously recommends approval of the policy exception and the program year extension for this project.
Here we go again.
Mr. Chair, thank you very much. I'd just like to speak in favor of this, and this is because a lot of you may have followed the blue line in that it was trying to negotiate a particular route that needed negotiations with the rail companies, and that did not serve us well, and it was not fruitful, and we had to realign this entire project because of that. And there was some discussion in the executive committee of whether this would take place or whether we would need extension after extension, and I had a chance to make a quick phone call afterwards, and I was assured that that was not the case, but that the year was needed because of some of the design things that are going on. And I have Chad Ellis, and I'd like him to come up and talk about those things more specifically, because I don't have all the technical background, and to be able to answer questions that I'm sure possibility some of our members might have. Please, Chad, if you could talk to this.
Thank you, Chair and members. Yes, that's correct. There's been a lot of work and progress made on this project ever since the realignment. Where these current these current improvements with this funding are slated for is still part of that original design. So that design is essentially complete, but there is additional needed engagement that has been happening here and along the entire corridor to progress this project. And to date, the schedule of 2026, this would be we're asking for a one-year extension from where it is right now out to 2026 for this project is based on the most current data and progress of that project. And it has been actively worked on and moving forward. So the project is confident that we can continue to get those, meet those milestones and deliver these benefits. Similar to the other project previously discussed, it is in the best interest of the community and our residents and the users to keep these projects together and built at the same time for the impacts versus trying to build these improvements in 2025 and then follow it up with a major light rail project trying to build around them in 2026. So we ask that you consider approving this additional one-year extension to allow staff to continue to focus on what's needed to deliver this project and not have to have that added burden of trying to fill funding gaps that not having this funding would create. So thank you.
I just want to point out too, this is not quite the amount that the last conversation was about. You know, when we think about it, it's $7 million, correct, Chad? That not, excuse me.
Correct. I believe this is $7 to $8 million.
Mary Liz has a question.
Mary Liz.
Mary Liz.
Mr. Chair, we had quite the conversation in the executive committee about this. Can you assure us if we give you this additional year that you won't be back? There was a lot of skepticism whether this project would actually be ready in 26, and we didn't get, you know, maybe you're more of an expert than people in the room, but we didn't get a sense that there was a high probability that this line was going to be, you know, ready to move that soon. And I guess, I mean, you said you would, but everything else I heard is that you won't. And I for one person, might see a one-year extension, but if you come back again, it's going to be really frustrating.
Thank you, Chair and member, for the question. And what I can say is staff is working as hard as we can to really deliver this project, but yet go through the process that's needed with the community. We can't guarantee on a mega project of this sort, but we feel confident that we are making great strides and progress towards delivering that project in 2026.
Mr. Chair?
Go ahead.
What's your thought or guarantee or willingness to weigh in on whether or not you would come back for another extension?
Chair and member, I'm not willing to weigh in on that, the process. Right now, the focus is really to continue with the design and the engagement and deliver the project. I'll have to leave that up to our leadership.
Good tap dance.
I think it's about this.
Member Barber?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There is a lot of active work going on the Blue Line corridor, but I share some similar concerns because right now we're in a phase where we're looking at 1.5 to 2 years for the environmental review, municipal consent, beginning of engineering and station area planning. After that, it's 1.5 to 2 years to develop the construction-ready design plans, after which there's a timing where everything goes right, we move to the construction and full funding grant agreement. Doing my math puts us 3 to 4 years out before we're really in construction, assuming that everything moves exactly as planned. So I think my biggest concern is this particular time window, because right now we're still sorting out what the actual long-term schedule is, but we're not looking at having a line that's open until 2028, 2030 is sort of the range that's been given right now.
I think we went Chris, and then you're up.
Answered my question.
Oh.
Good.
Stan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, I think the big differentiator here is that this is a solo project in and of itself. If we don't do this extension, they could always reapply. The project can still get the same money again at a later solicitation that's more appropriate based on the timing of when the project is done, when we have better assurance of when the LRT will be ready to go. You know, from Member Barber's point, if it's 28 to 30 is when they think the LRT is going to be ready to go up there, then but the whole point of this extension is to co-term the roadway with the LRT development. If we did 26, we're still going to be off by a couple years, and so we'd be back for a third round of extension, and you know that just doesn't seem right. So even though this feels like the exact same conversation we just had, it is a single project that can reapply for the exact same amount of money of what it has if we don't do this extension, to come back to a more appropriate time. Because this has already been extended once. The original program was 22, now it's 25, now we're pushing out 26. So I do think, this is one that I don't think is like the last one, and it doesn't seem reasonable to do, because also walking into knowing where these alignments are going to be, the railroads are not easy to work with. We know that. We score based on that in the regional solicitation, that if you have to negotiate with the railroad, you get a huge dent on your risk, because those are less likely to go on time and when expected. So this is one where I'm not necessarily in favor of this extension. I would rather see the applicant reapply or withdraw and reapply to then get the funds in a more appropriate funding year. And if stuff happens with LRT, if it doesn't, if the cards don't fall the way we want them to, they can decide to apply the appropriate program year. Thank you.
Thank you. Dan?
Well, I'm supportive of this recommended motion. We're building the gold line through Ramsey County and Washington County. Now, it's a bus guideway, but 80% of it's in its own lane. And we've had to coordinate a lot of city road projects with that. There's a lot of effort and coordination. We have the opportunity where I trust the professionals, engineering, the planners, I trust the engineers at these cities that they're putting their best foot forward to coordinate for the efficiency of getting that LRT project done. I just think to delay it, push it back, have them reapply, that just adds a lot of work, cost, effort. We can make the decision now. I just think it's really a good reward. We're going to get more of this with transit lines where you're going to coordinate road projects. And they put their best foot forward. I think the opportunity to get these projects done at the same time for efficiency is a good move.
All right, thank you. Julie?
Thank you. So this is the problem when you make exceptions to rules and don't have the policy. So, again, this is a really hard one, and I appreciate Commissioner Holberg's comments about the guarantee to get it finished, but what I heard, there's a guarantee that it won't be finished by 2026. Won't even get started. I mean, that's more of a guarantee than yes, it'll get done. So my question is, why are you requesting an extension to 2026? Why not make that extension to 2029 based on what we just approved?
Can't answer that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of comments. So the dates that I'm using are developed by professionals. They're the dates that have been presented by our project office to partners and corridor management committee and various entities as well. So I have quite good confidence in what I'm saying as well. This project also differs from the other one in is the $7 million would get dropped into the next solicitation if we were to take action on it today into the roadways category. So it's a little different from the previous one we discussed.
Done competing with it. Let's get out of here.
So I'm not sure if this is possible, so you can all correct me if I'm going down a weird path, but could we ask the city to amend their extension request to 2029 and approve it at this point? If the LRT accelerates quickly and meets the 2006, we deal with the issue at that point. But right now, I don't see anything here that tells me that a one-year extension is going to get them anything other than more paperwork in a year to come back and talk to us again.
Mr. Chair, I would actually answer, if we delay this at all, would it not be able to fall into this next solicitation? I don't know. I'm putting them on the spot. My apologies to our staff.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, so.
Maybe just restate her question to make sure everybody heard what she's asking.
Sure,
please.
so if I understand the question correctly, the question is if we had the applicant withdraw their request in favor of applying in the next solicitation, what timing is required for that applicant to be able to follow through on that process and make that decision?
And for like the funds from the $7 million now to go be available for a different project in the next solicitation.
And then what happens with those $7 million in 2020? They're in 2025 right now. So the next regional solicitation is anticipated to be released for applicants to start putting their applications together this fall. My understanding is in the November timeframe, middle November timeframe. So for an applicant to go through the process of withdrawing and then prepping themselves for an application, I would say the sooner they know that process, the better. So a delay to July gives them that much less time to line up their own CIP and their own staff in order to put another application together. The $7 million are sitting in 2025 right now. That program year is already programmed out, and so that $7 million will either reduce the amount of overprogramming in that year or allow another project to advance forward.
Mr. Chair.
Yep, hang on.
So let me rephrase my thoughts. Could the city hold off on this request today, come back at a future meeting with a request for an extension, not having to withdraw, not having to redo all of that process, but just come back with an extension request for 2029 or whatever year seems more reasonable? Is there any reason they couldn't do that?
Mr. Chair, members of the board, there's no reason they couldn't do that. I'm going to see if the city wants to comment on this themselves, but the longer they wait to do that, the shorter their window of opportunity is to get into the next solicitation. And the next solicitation is where they might want to be in terms of that required or optimal timing.
Yeah, and in all due respect, that's why I'm saying let's not make them withdraw and do it all over again.
Thank you, Chair, members. Jesse Struve, City Engineer for Brooklyn Park again. Yes, we could, I suppose, withdraw. We would prefer to get an extension, or if our extension's denied and we have to reapply for regional solicitation. There are financial impacts to that. Each application costs the city $15,000 to $20,000 to reapply for future funds. I'd prefer not to have to apply for that. In terms of why did we choose 2026? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Let me rephrase. I'm not asking you to withdraw. I understand the cost and I understand the impact. I'm saying, can we table this issue today and you come back with a new extension request? Because I know you have to go back to the city to get approvals. Come back with a new extension request with a more reasonable date at our next meeting.
Mr. Chair, councilmen, or members, yes, I mean, we certainly can entertain that. Again, it would also apply to not just this regional solicitation, but we have 2 other ones associated with this project as well, that we would then have to ask for that same extension. You know, again, based on our conversations with the project team, 2026 seems like a reasonable benchmark. I mean, I understand, you know, the concern. I truly do. Having this project was supposed to be up and operational by 2021 when I started with the City of Brooklyn Park in 2014. So I understand that delays can and potentially will happen. So I mean, that's certainly something. If the council here, sorry, deems to kind of table this, I mean, we'll certainly work with staff to come up with either the same or a different proposal.
Mr. Chair. Well, we have the city engineer up. I'd just like to ask, you talked about it's hooked to 2 other projects. So talk more about that, about how it impacts those other projects, because this is another one of those little nuances of a project when it starts to have a domino effect.
Mr. Chair, members, again, I mean, our other 2 applications are directly tied with LRT. This one is a standalone project, so I mean, but the other 2 projects have a funding date of 2026 as well. And so, you know, if we're anticipating extending projects, those other projects would also have to be reflected and changed accordingly as well, so that all 3 projects are aligned together with that funding.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion to approve.
So we have a motion at this point to approve?
I'll second.
I have a second. All right, I know that there are still people on my list for discussion.
Who was the second?
Who's the second?
Just continue the discussion. There's no problem.
All right, so we have a motion and a second, and Member Geisler had his hand up, was in our list.
Elaine, if you could just fill in, so if we deny an extension, what happens? You know, they can no longer, you know, can they apply for another extension, or is that the end of it, or what are the mechanics of denying them?
Well, their options are to complete the project in 25. So then, if there is other construction with the blue line, it may have to be redone, part of it. So it is their option to go ahead and construct in 25. If they decide not to do that, they would withdraw, and then they could reapply. And they could choose a project year 27, 28, and if they do it in 26, they can do advanced construction too. So that gives them more flexibility too.
But to clarify, if we deny this extension, they couldn't come back with a different extension, saying 29, with everybody together, because we said you're not allowed another extension. Is that how this works?
I would say if the TAB is deciding not to approve this extension, you're telling them no. Now, the option 2 is, the proposal here is a 1-year extension. I know Mark was asking if they could come back for a later. You could always change this one, but again, they mentioned that they have 3 other projects that are at 26 that they would construct at the same time.
Back up a whole bunch of projects.
But there's still always that possibility if they can't construct in 26, then they come back for an extension and it might not get the extension. And then we're back to where we are, maybe.
Actually, I had a clarifying question for Deb Barber. You mentioned that the blue line be operational in 28, 29?
Right now, the projected operation date is somewhere between 2028 and 2020, or 2030. So it's a 2-year range of, it might be ready by then.
And then when's the construction timeline? Because that might
It's
align better.
anywhere from, I would say, based off of the timelines we've been given 3 to 5 years out from now.
So 26, 27? So then it might align is what I'm thinking.
That's what they're thinking. That's what staff has told me at Hennepin County, is that this aligns very well in this project. It's a very secure project. That's what I've been told.
So can we ask the city, if we were to decline the extension, would the city move ahead with construction, or what would happen with the project?
Mr. Chair, council members, again, this is a Hennepin County project. It's been on the books since 1998, I believe, and we've been pushing Hennepin County to do this since 1998. So, I mean, I guess that would be something we would have to discuss with Hennepin County on whether we would move forward with that project in 2025. I would state that, if that project is completed and then light rail comes in after the fact, that there would be likely additional costs to the light rail project that would probably exceed the amount that you grant us for our regional solicitation funds. So, I mean, there is that aspect as well, because we would be constructing a corridor. We're not putting in, while we'll put in a space for the light rail to go into, we won't be putting in a lot of the infrastructure that would have to go in. And so a good portion of that project would then have to get redone to accommodate the light rail.
But you hadn't analyzed what would happen if the answer was no today?
Again, we have not had those discussions.
Okay.
If the answer is no, then we'll certainly have those discussions, but we're hoping for not no, I guess.
Good.
Charles.
Thank you, members. I'll identify myself again, Charles Carlson, Executive Director, MPS. One further, complication of this, there's the design work, which obviously has progressed in the past. There's, whether the project is ready for construction in 2026 is one aspect, and there's various ways under a federal transit large project you can begin construction early. But what you can't do before the full funding grant agreement is signed is actually begin to expend or be able to authorize any federal funding. So any federal funding authorization must wait until the entire transit project is ready to go. And that could be one of the areas that a little more time to work through on, are we asking for the right year, may make sense, because while construction could begin early under some circumstances, as talked about today, the discussion in the TAB executive meeting was really, it's 26, or we don't really want this to come back again for another request. The complication of a full funding grant agreement for the entire LRT project could be another dynamic we haven't considered enough in the discussion so far, and maybe worth aligning, not just for this project, but for the others, that, the TAB doesn't necessarily have to make this decision today, and could be subject to some more coordination on whether we have the right year in place. Not to say that there's a reason not to advance a program year extension, but in the interest of doing one to the right year one time, a little more time to consider the transit funding dynamics of this could make sense.
Can I just?
We'll go Brian and then we'll go.
Sorry, point of clarification. Do we have a motion on the table right now or
Yes.
not? We do, okay.
To approve. Andy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to, express sort of sympathies of the situation. It's certainly a challenging one on behalf of the applicants, and I'd certainly love to explore what Executive Director Carlson mentioned in terms of considering alternatives that allow us more time to make a better decision. What comes to mind here, I think, is just the notion of precedent. I think it's been said a couple of times of we do have guidelines here. We have exception practices, and it feels like the odds are greater than not that we will be back here having another of these discussions, at which point we are stacking exception upon exception. And so if you go back to the beginning, it's nothing personal pertaining to this particular one, but I also think we have an obligation as a board and as a commission here to uphold what we set forth and what we're trying to uphold for consistency's sake. So I'd be in favor of a more creative solution that allowed us, if we are going to make an exception, make one that hopefully sticks and not put us in a situation where we're likely here having the same discussion, making the same exception for a third time. Thank you.
Liz?
So super quick, the data that's pushing this out to the 29th is another idea. We've already okayed like more than 20 million to the 29th. I mean, it's like, we don't want to push these earmarked dollars so that by the time the real solicitation comes around for those program years, 10 to 20% of it is already set aside as a result of extensions. Makes me very nervous when I hear that there's 2 other projects that have a 26 year. I'm going to vote no today. I would prefer that you just withdraw it and come back and give us a bigger picture, a bigger timeline, work with staff. It doesn't feel like this has to be decided finally today, and that there could be a better solution than just no.
Thank you. Peter?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would, to Member Lewis's point and Councilmember Robertson's point about the setting the precedent, I would weigh that very heavily if we weren't going to be, did you?
No, go ahead.
If we
Peter,
weren't
sorry.
going to, I thought you were going to help me out there, Randy. Come on.
There's no help, no.
Thanks a lot, Randy. If we weren't going to tackle the whole regional solicitation process starting this summer, but we're here and we're now, and I would be in favor of somehow we could give it more consideration, but I'm not sure what that means in terms of withdrawing a project, when they'd come back in, when Mr. Carlson's information would be available, and how soon the good city folks need to act, need to have the decision so they can act. So I'm just unaware of that. And now, thank you, Randy. Hey, help me out.
You're quite welcome.
Thank
Anytime,
you,
Peter.
thank you.
Matt?
Seems to me we're dealing with 3 projects here, not 1 project. So I believe that anything we do, whether it's yes or no, or whatever the wording of the resolution is, it should speak to all 3 projects, not the 1 project.
Okay. Thank you. Randy?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to call a question.
Okay, question's been called. That ends the questions.
Even about an amendment?
Yeah, we have to move.
I don't think so. We have to vote on,
Calling the
and
question.
right now, the question is, let me get the actual, is voting for a program change request from Brooklyn Park.
23, 30.
And that's what we're voting. So yes would be approving it. Your no would be not approving that question. Does that sound right?
Mr. Chair?
Do we vote to call the question and get I think there's a percent.
Well, that's why I thought I asked that before, the last time there was
that's
a
what I
call
was
for a
thinking.
question.
Go right to the vote.
You go right to the vote.
I think you go right to the vote. I think
Right to
that
the
ends
vote.
the discussion.
Only if it's the maker of the motion, I think. Do I remember that correctly?
That's what I was.
That can call the
I thought
question?
anyone could call the question.
Anybody
Anybody
can
could call.
Anyone can call the question.
Point of order? Just a question. So if we vote on this particular thing, can another motion be made to have this come back to us, or is it done?
Because I think if this is voted down, it puts us back in neutral.
Yeah.
That's the way I read it. That means nothing's happened, because that motion was defeated. Then it would have to come back and
Oh, it's 2/3 vote needed to end debate.
to 2/3 vote to what?
End debate.
Oh, so we have to vote, well, we messed up the last one.
Yeah.
So we have to have a vote on the question, calling of the question. All right. Do I need a motion and a second of that, or is it just
No, you just
all in
ask.
favor of? Okay. So,
See if we got 2/3.
so all in favor of
Calling the question.
calling the question, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
No.
All right, we're gonna go back to a hand. All in favor of the calling of the question, raise your hand.
It's not 2/3.
10.
10.
10.
And the nays?
Not 2/3.
10.
10, I got 11.
Which is not
But it's not
2/3.
2/3.
Yeah, it's not 2/3.
Are we sure about this?
So does that mean discussion stays going?
Yes.
Haven't ran that one. All right, now,
Mr.
I'm gonna start and go around right here. We're gonna go Doug, Brian, Peter, Chris, Matt. May as well have standing there. Well, now we're gonna double back to George. All right.
Question to the maker of the motion. Would you either be amenable to withdrawing and entertaining a motion to go back to staff to rework the date, or accept a substitute motion to that effect?
If I heard from the city that would be worthwhile for them, for the city.
At a point, once a motion's made and seconded, it's no longer the maker's motion, it's the
Okay.
body's
She
motion.
can withdraw.
Then we'd have to.
I can withdraw my
You
motion.
have to vote on it.
She can withdraw.
I
a
can
motion.
withdraw a
Oh, you
motion.
can?
Yes, she can, or, yes, absolutely. And she doesn't need the seconder to, okay.
Well, I'm gonna keep going. You're good?
Brian was.
I was waiting for Jamie to answer the question.
All right, go ahead.
Mr. Chair.
Maybe that'll answer some of these questions.
Members, Jesse Struve again with City of Brooklyn Park. I mean, in terms of, we would prefer a yes on the extension tonight, but it doesn't sound like that's kind of the feeling of the group. And so we would respectfully withdraw our current request, have time to come back and revisit, and then revisit with other staff, and then we can bring forward another request for an extension and potentially, extend some of those other projects as well, versus getting a no today on this project, and then that kind of ties us in to that we can, I don't know if we'd be able to come back for another extension request after we've been told no, I would think not. So I think it would be probably in Brooklyn Park's best interest to withdraw our application at this point, and then
I don't know what
come
to tell you,
back
'cause it was 10 to 11
and
vote.
look at the
Right,
years.
but still, I don't know how where people
Yeah.
are.
Unless
So,
you want to wait till the vote.
well, so your motion and second are still on the floor.
No.
And now, huh?
Pulled it back.
Did she?
No, I haven't yet. I
No,
said I wouldn't
we
yet.
talked about it, but
We
it
talked-
hadn't been yet. So now you know that there's a willing to do that.
That just helps inform everyone's vote, because you still have the motion to act on.
Yeah.
An immediate vote.
Okay,
And what the.
so you're
applicants-
leaving your motion out to
I
approve.
didn't say that. I
No,
didn't say that.
but I mean, right now, that's what's on the floor.
Yeah, that's what's on the table right
Okay.
now.
And what the applicant suggests is withdrawing their application so that.
That's not correct. That really wasn't correct.
Point
Yes,
of order here.
Back to
Point
the
of order,
maker of the
Mr.
motion.
All
Chair.
right,
That has to be
We
addressed.
checked our resources, and when you call a question, you move immediately to a vote. No 2/3 is required. That's according to Robert's Rules of Orders. I've checked to see if our policy provides for any other voting method, and it does not. So I believe that my calling the question, we should go back to that and vote on the original motion. So the 2/3 is incorrect procedure according to Robert's Rules of Order.
okay. I hadn't heard of it before you, but I didn't know. All right.
Order, Mr. Chair. One option potentially could be to, so the applicant doesn't have to withdraw everything, is to table it until next meeting,
It's a
come
table
back
to be
and present information on the additional 2 items, along with some just background
But
information.
we still have to vote. We have a motion on the
Agreed, but,
floor. We can't,
but I want
Unless-
to inform that vote.
unless the motion, or unless the maker wants to remove that. But right now, we have a vote on the floor to approve their extension. There is a motion and a second on the floor. The question's been called, so now it's time for the vote on the motion in here. Nothing, it's what the engineer said, it's the motion on the floor approving a 1-year extension for this project. Is it clear? All right, I just want to make sure. make sure I'm clear too. All right, with that,
We may need a roll call on this.
yep,
Mr. Chair.
I'll go the way we normally do first. With that, all in favor of the motion, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign.
No.
All right, now we're gonna do a roll call. So all in favor of the motion, say, or raise your hand, excuse me.
That's not a roll call.
That's not a roll call. You have to do names.
Oh, we gonna do a,
Yep.
oh, what did I say?
You said you were
Raise
gonna do a
hands.
roll call, but can
Oh,
we
I'm
just do
sorry.
show of hands?
I didn't mean that. I meant a show of hands. You know what I meant.
No, I didn't.
All right, a show of hands, those in favor of the motion.
That's not a roll call.
That's not a roll call.
No. So you want roll call? I don't know, now I'm confused.
Yeah,
We
I
did-
asked for a roll call.
We did a raise, you asked for a roll call?
I asked for a roll call.
Okay, sorry, I missed roll call.
It's all right.
There's been a call for the roll. All right, Jenna, please.
Okay. Gattell,
Aye.
Anderson,
Nay.
Bailey,
Aye.
Barber. No. Kauppi.
No.
Crimmins is not here. DeGan,
No.
Geisler,
No.
Hanson,
Not here.
He's left.
not, oh, he's not here. Holberg,
No.
Hollinshead,
I'm going to abstain. I don't know.
July's not here. Jenkins,
No.
Jepson.
Yes.
Johnson is not here. Karwoski,
Aye.
Buell,
No.
Koski's not here. Lewis,
No.
Lindeke,
Left.
Milichnik,
Aye.
Martinson,
No.
Mattis Castillo,
Left.
Petrick. Aye. Robertson,
No.
Schember,
No.
Stephenson.
No.
Ulrich is not here. Williams,
Aye.
Workman's not here, and then Winchell. Okay.
Johnson got missed?
Johnson Glenn or Johnson?
Glenn Johnson.
Oh, yeah, okay.
I'm a no.
You're a no.
How many yeses? 7 yeses and 14 noes.
So the final vote was 7 yeses, 14 noes. So it fails. Yes, sir.
Point of order, I would invite the city to, your extension was declined. That does not prohibit you from filing another extension request. So I would ask you meet with staff and come back with new dates.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Order on that. The motion was denied.
Denied.
We have not made an affirmative, negative statement on this, so we can
Yeah,
still.
I think we're back to neutral again.
Yeah, so at this
Back to
point,
where we started prior.
Sorry, you're correct.
And Mr. Chair, I would like to make a motion for 2023-31 that we table this until our July meeting.
I second that.
All right, so I have a motion and a second on the floor to table this item till July meeting. Discussion. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Table till July. All right, we're gonna try to keep moving here. 2023-32. Losing members quickly.
All right, we're losing critical mass here, so we'll work through this one, hopefully. All right, Mr. Chair, members of the board, you want me to proceed? So
We have to.
Okay.
We gotta get at least this one done.
All right, so 2023-32 is all about PROTECT funding. The PROTECT program is a new funding source that comes from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Eligibility for PROTECT funding is very prescriptive and focused on making surface transportation infrastructure more resilient for natural hazards. Funds become available in 2024, so for 2024 allocation, staff, Met Council staff have identified eligible expenses within existing projects due to the tight timeline to deliver on these funds. So those funds will go towards those previously programmed projects and lower the amount of over-programming in 2024. The action today is focused on $14.5 million of Protect funds that are available for 25, 26, and 27 program years. For 28 and beyond, Protect funding will be allocated as part of the regional solicitation. Two options were considered for these funds and discussed at both funding and programming and TAC. The first option would review existing projects in 25, 26, and 27 for eligible expenses and be applied to those projects, which would reduce the overall over-programming in each of those program years. This is exactly what Met Council is doing with 2024 program funds. This option really becomes infeasible now, or less viable, that the board today has approved the program year extension for those 4 locally funded projects related to the Highway 252 I-94 regional project. So the second option that was presented and discussed by the technical committee would select 2 new projects from the recent 2022 regional solicitation, both of which are 100% eligible for Protect funding. So assuming, again, those 2 program year extensions, the first one with the 4 locally projects is approved, and option 2 is recommended by TAC. The 2 new projects were the next unfunded projects in strategic capacity and roadway reconstruction and modernization categories. They are Carver County's Highway 5, Lake Minnewaska and Arboretum project, and Washington County's County Road 19A and 100th Street project, respectively. Allocating these funds now ensures that there is adequate time for project sponsors to deliver on these projects. The total funding needed to fund these 2 projects is $17 million. The requested action is to allocate the $14.5 million of available Protect funding and to balance the books using some STP funding that becomes available because of those 4 local projects being moved out from 2026 to 2029. So that's $3.7 million available. So the recommendation from TAC is to allocate that $14.5 million of Protect funding and $2.5 million of the available STP funding in order to fully fund these 2 new projects. There's $1.2 million that remains in 2026 as a result of this. TAC did not take action on that, so by policy, those funds would roll into the next solicitation and would be distributed accordingly.
Comments? Ms. Barber.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Definitely in support of option 2 and the proposal on the table. These are very good projects and a great way to use these funds. The Highway 5 project was the next project on the cutoff. The example that I talked about at exec was when I look back at the Highway 101 project, which was a land bridge, which is similar to what Highway 5 is right now. Once that bridge got lifted out of the river and the wetlands could get restored to a little more natural state, you could see the big difference even in this year's flooding, what a great impact it had. I think some of the surrounding areas were much less affected by having the improvements in the watershed and in the wetlands area. So I think not only these projects help from the perspective of traffic and getting around, but it also helps the environment. So I'm very much in favor of moving on this option 2.
Myron.
Yeah, thank you. I also want to thank you for that lead-in. I would also agree with option 2 in this particular case. This is in the city that I reside in, but it's within Washington County. As I should mention that in 2019, Washington County began what's called the Southwest Arterial Study, which was funded through the county and the city to address the lack of a specific arterial roadway in this critical area of the county. We have a lot of new development happening down there, and currently there is only one direct access that goes into our business park, which is Jamaica Avenue, which goes onto Highway 61. And it is fully built out currently with the double roundabout. I think it was one of the first ones actually in the state at the time. And all of this additional traffic that's being generated by additional businesses that are coming into our community in our business park, they're currently under construction, is going to put that particular intersection over capacity, getting onto Highway 61. The property, or this particular project, does, as noted earlier, does qualify for this funding request. It will reduce congestion. It will definitely improve safety, because one of the interesting things in this case, this project currently has an at-grade separated railroad crossing. And so we definitely are in the process and want to build a bridge that would go over the railroad for truck traffic and residential traffic. And the last thing I'll just mention real quick is the total cost is around $36 million. And the city has been, along with the county, has been looking at our federal partners too, and getting some additional funding sources to make sure that we can bridge the gap that is being currently made by this project. But it's very much a worthy project and will definitely have some regional significance. Thank you.
Thank you. Brian?
I'm gonna vote in favor of this as well, but I also wanted to point out something, that in fact, the addition of these two roadway projects to the approved projects of the last regional solicitation, I believe, well, as staff noted here, will bring the percentage distribution of the roadway project category back up to 54 or 55%, which I believe brings us back into large compliance with our guidelines for our funding modal distributions. So maybe we can do away with more angst about that.
Thank you, Randy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm familiar with both these projects. They're very worthy, and they certainly fit the criteria of the PROTECT program. And with that, I move approval of the recommended motion.
Second.
Okay, I got, you guys got the motion and second. I don't know who the second was down there. but- Okay, so I have a motion and a second on the floor. Any further discussion? I don't know if I missed anybody. I don't think so. All right, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Same sign. Motion carries. We have through the action items, the next two items, one is moved to August. We're gonna move the first one, the electric vehicle infrastructure to August. And the other one's gonna be emailed to us, right?
PP.
Be emailed to us. So with that,
Move to adjourn.
motion to adjourn.
Second.
Mr. Geisler, second. Thanks, everyone. Long day.
Yeah, good conversation though. This is always
Challenge.
robust meeting.
Robust.
Nice job.
Man, that was.
Yes, Mr. Chair. In the normal Maluchnik fashion, you far exceeded what I think you did. You did a wonderful job, Mr. Mayor.
Well, I didn't think on a call of a question. I thought it went right to a question.
He actually looked it up.
And I don't understand why we're